Hey everybody, we're here to talk about the MCP registry that is being built by the open source community that's been mentioned a few times earlier here in the talks. This is the official one that's endorsed by the MCP steering committee and trying to centralize a bunch of work that has been duplicated around the ecosystem. If you've been following MCP's release, there's been some sort of new registry of some sort been released pretty much every week ever since MCP came out back in November. And the goal here is to deduplicate and consolidate a bunch of that effort. The big thing I want to communicate to you as we talk through this is that what we're building here, it's a starting point for a server discovery solution. It's not a complete solution. And the big things that I'm going to highlight are like, where is that line? What's in scope for the centralized solution versus what is out of scope? First, who are we? I'm here with Toby. Toby and I, my name's Tatis. We are the maintainers of the registry project. Um, I'm from Pulse MCP. We were one of the early, kind of one of those third-party MCP server directories, and I spent a lot of time writing a in-depth weekly MCP newsletter. And Toby here is from GitHub. GitHub has put together what is the most popular, objectively the most popular MCP server to date in the ecosystem. And we're maintaining this registry, but a lot of other people have been contributing. We have a whole engineering team from GitHub that has been pushing a bunch of code. We have people from Connor from VS Code, Joel from NuGet, a bunch of other people have started to contribute. So it's a big community effort stretching across a range of different people involved that has been contributing. So let's start by talking about what are the problems we are solving for. What's in scope for this project? Big first thing is that third-party registries can't get comprehensive server lists. So those third-party registries I've been mentioning that are getting launched all the time, those sometimes called server marketplaces, a lot of them are using some sort of web scrapers, usually doing some sort of scraping of GitHub repositories, since that's where most people are publishing their GitHub servers. They're missing things throughout the web ecosystem. They might not be scraping places, more niche places like GitLab. They might miss more complex repositories. So if you have an MCP, like the base case is that an MCP server is the only thing in a GitHub repository. But if there's a mono repo with a dozen servers hosted by a single company, these web scrapers might miss it. And then that's only open source servers. Like there's also this whole world of remote servers that might not even have any sort of repository published. These registries all miss those. The end result is a whole bunch of fragmented data. As an end consumer of MCP, you can't really go to any of these third-party registries and expect that any one of them has a fully comprehensive uh, source of truth for what's going on in the MCP ecosystem. And then on the other side, furthering that fragmentation, server maintainers, they have to manage that metadata everywhere. So when a server maintainer, they've put together a server, they want to get listed on all of these registries or push some sort of update, they have to go around to all of these different registries around the internet. They have to go to GitHub, they have to go create an account on Smithery. They might need to send an email to us at Pulse MCP to say, hey, this needs updating, this is no longer accurate. That's all just resulting in further fragmentation of every registry has a different kind of set of data of what's going on about each MCP server. The third problem is that we're trying to solve here is that the client apps, they need some sort of source of truth for how to install these MCP servers. So this is a little downstream of the kind of discovery problem, but we're hoping to solve it in a more centralized way, where the current solution today, it's largely predicated on server maintainers publishing some sort of README where you might scroll halfway down, find the installation instructions, look at some complicated JSON that you have to copy paste. Sometimes, if you're lucky for your favorite MCP client, you might have a one-click install button, but that's all on the kind of server maintainer to collate together. And in other solutions, there are other kind of more hacky solutions, like MCP clients might try to pull this README in and run some sort of inference to try to figure it out in an automated fashion. But ultimately, a lot of people are doing all sorts of manual steps to try to shoehorn all these installation instructions into the various clients. So that's what's in scope for what we are solving for. Problems we are not solving for. Again, just to reiterate, like this centralized registry is just a starting point for the server discovery problem. It's not a complete solution. One thing we're definitely not going to solve or resolve is the source code storage problem. So we're meeting the industry where it's at. Everyone is already publishing all these MCP servers to places like npm, PyPy, Docker Hub, GitHub Container Registry. These registries, these kind of source code registries, are I've already solved the source code storage problem. So this new MCP registry is not going to store source code. We're just going to allow you to list a list of packages with some metadata about, hey, we published this at npm at this package name, we published this on Docker Hub at this package name, and so on. Another problem we're not solving, this one may be a little more surprising, is that we do not want to solve concepts like advanced search, filtering, ranking, and so on. I'll talk a little bit more about what that solution looks like instead in a second here, but the out of scope for this centralized effort is a list of these things. We will provide a very basic search where you might have like a very simple use case, like, hey, I wonder if my teammates already published our server, or let me look up like what the latest version of our server is before I publish a new version. So very basic search, like a string match on the name, will be in scope. But besides that, complicated ideas like vector search, categorizing, tagging, filtering by that, or ranking, like what is the number one best server for your query, the number two best server, and so on, that's out of scope, and we're not going to solve that. Our goal is to delegate that down to the downstream client marketplaces and third-party registries that will pull from the centralized registry. So that's what's out of scope. What does the solution actually look like? What are we building here with this open source group? So the starting point on the publisher side of how we get information into the registry is that we're defining this JSON shape that we're calling server.json. So this JSON shape is going to include some obvious metadata like name, description. It's going to include those references to source code registries like npm, PyPy, etc. It'll even include things like remote URL, a set of remote URLs. We're not only storing references to local servers here as well. It's going to have those installation instructions that I talked about earlier, and ultimately you're going to have this JSON. You're going to be able to run a CLI command, something like MCP r publish, and point to the server.json file. We'll see a demo of this a little later, but that is the idea of like where that starting point is. We're going to have the server.json file. We're going to push it into the registry on a per server basis. And then on the other side, we're going to have on the read side, we're going to expect there to be this kind of ETL layer of some sort between the official, this MCP, the centralized registry, REST API, and MCP clients. We specifically, like, we expect MCP clients to not query the registry on behalf of every user. So if you fire up VS Code, like we saw in some demos earlier today, you will not be querying this centralized registry every time you run a search on the VS Code MCP marketplace, for example. Instead, what's happening on the back end is we expect marketplaces like the VS Code MCP marketplace to maintain this mirror or subset of this registry, where they'll be able to pull the upstream data down and enrich it with their own opinionated or proprietary data. So, for example, you might have VS Code tracking what kinds of what are the download counts of all the various MCP servers out there for specifically from VS Code users, and they might do something like rank the results by the number of download counts of VS Code users specifically. In some cases, for a longer tail of MCP clients, they might even choose to outsource that sort of responsibility for maintaining that mirror to some third-party service. It won't necessarily be one-to-one with like kind of separate registries to client apps. There might be this sort of middle layer that we're designing for as well. But we haven't figured out everything yet. That's just the kind of beginnings of the architecture that we're pitching here, and community involvement is key. So my pitch to you is to please check out the Model Context Protocol registry repository on GitHub. I'll share links a little later here, but we'd love to have input on a few things that I'll highlight here. First question is, for anyone working or engaging deeply with MCP client apps, are we going to successfully provide you the data you need to successfully integrate with these servers in a standardized way? We think we have that shape of the server.json down, but there might be some data, some niche data, some long tail use cases that clients are relying on or collecting from users in a non-standardized way that would be helpful to include here. So we would love for you to jump into the discussions and issues and tell us what we might be missing. And similarly, for third-party MCP marketplaces and all these sub-registries being created downstream of this centralized registry, will you be able to actually leverage the API shapes that we're doing? This might not be one hope we have is that we'll be able to share this kind of unified registry API shape so that we can do things like share SDKs or compose registry consumption in some way. And this probably won't be true of every single registry, but to some degree, it would be nice to standardize these API shapes across the industry. So we'd love to get input from folks as to where the gaps might be with what you're managing on your side. And to dig in a little deeper, some specific artifacts that we're hoping to finalize in the coming weeks is these 4 schemas that we're working through. Starting on the left, we have this kind of the read server data schemas. At the top left, you have this base registry open API schema. That's the base that we hope anyone storing MCP server metadata will adopt in some way. And then the community registry itself, it's going to be a subset of that sort of base registry, like you saw on the last slide. Those constraints are mostly around what's conceivable to store as this kind of public service where we think thoughtfully about things like security and spam concerns. But other kind of implementations might have a different take on that, especially if they're, say, private or internal, or they have different kind of surrounding security guarantees. We'd love to help finalizing those open API specs. Then on the right side, where we're talking more about publishing server metadata, we're introducing that concept of a server.json. And what we found as we start to kind of flesh out that shape is that this server.json actually has a whole lot of applications across the MCP ecosystem. The registry is just one use case. We might use it for things like declaring static sets of tools that you would expect to see returned on some initialization call. You might see the server.json file at like a .well-known URI for decentralized discovery purposes. But we're using the registry as a forcing function to start to define what that shape might look like for everyone across the MCP ecosystem. And then, of course, in the bottom right, you have that the community registry will take a subset of that in terms of like what it's actually going to host and store and serve up to consumers of that centralized registry. We'd love for you to take a look at these schemas that we've defined so far, open up issues, open up discussions. We'll eagerly talk through any details or questions you might have. So now I'm going to hand it off to Toby here, who's going to share his screen and walk us through a server publication and client installation demo here. Toby, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Tatis. That was a really great overview. So today I'm going to demo publishing an MCP server to the registry, but I wanted to give a quick overview of the registry as well and show some of what Tatis was just talking about. So the URL for this is github.com/model-context-protocol/registry. And like Tatis said, we're building this in the open. There's a lot of pull requests. There's a lot of issues. We have a lot of discussion going on. So we'd encourage everyone to come, check this out, start digging into it a little bit, and I'll show you how you can run it. It's not live and hosted yet because it's not fully complete. Like we said, we want to get a bunch of feedback, but you can run it on your machine. And so that's what I'm going to do today. It's actually Dockerized. And what you want to do to get started is clone the repo and then build the registry image. And that will just tuck in all the source code and everything and build a Docker image. And then you can run it with Docker Compose up. So let's do that. I already built the image. And if we run it with Docker Compose up, let's see. Oh, we're doing a bunch of downloading now. So this is the joy of the live demo. I'm not sure why it reset this before I was going. So we'll wait for Docker to run. While we're doing that, let's take a look at the inside of the registry project. We have a tools publisher. And so this is that command line tool that Tatis was talking about. This is how you as a server author will create a server.json file with all of your metadata in it and publish it to the registry. All of this stuff is built in Go. So you can imagine compiling this and we'll run it. So let's see, is this done? Okay, great. So the registry is now up and running on my machine. And what you get out of that is an API and a Swagger index. Why is this not working? Hmm. Let's see. Let's try this again. Okay. It's not. Well, we might be cutting our demo short if we can't get this up and running, everybody. That's really odd. Let's see, is the publisher working? Okay, so we'll imagine that the server is up and running. I might have to debug that later. But to demonstrate the command line tool that Tatis was talking about, we just created, it was called MCP Publisher. We'll create a server JSON. I have a sample MCP server that I'm going to make and try to publish to the server. And so you'll see that this is the repository name, and we're going to use GitHub for the authentication here. And we add this. If you have a GitHub account, you get this sort of magic domain name that we're going to use for authentication. So you'll say io.github.your username and then the repository, a description for the MCP server, a repo URL, the version you're publishing, and then this is key, the execute command that the MCP hosts are going to use to run this MCP server. So I published this one to npm, and so to run it, you do npx mirror the name of the package and then latest. And if you look, it created this server JSON that looks very similar to a lot of the stuff that Tatis was just demoing, right? Like we've got all this information and we've have the information that the MCP hosts are going to require to install and run this MCP server. So positional arguments, if there was environment variables, they would be in here too. If it was a remote MCP server, you would have the remote URL. And then to publish it, and I don't think this is going to work since our server is not running, but you would do a publish. Yeah, it's not running. So unfortunately, we had some kind of issues here. And so I'll have to cut it a little short, but let's go through. I encourage everyone to go through this, open issues. We'll get it working very soon. I'll try to find out what's going on with this thing. Live demo gods were not in my favor today, but I think Tatis, if you want to wrap it up, I think you can do that.
Yeah, if we could bring it back to my screen. Like we've been saying, please help us bring this to life. We're very open to collaborators and contributors. The contribution process is very straightforward. If you're keen to have a look and pick off an issue or two, the steps you should take is number one, just start by reading through the registry docs. So like Toby was just showing, it's just a folder inside that top level repository that he was just demoing. There's not very many. It should take you like 30 minutes to basically go through end to end, and you'll be fully up to speed with where we are and how we're thinking about things. So after you've read through that, review the issues, particularly look at the ones labeled with go live blocker tag. Those are the ones we're trying to push out the door as soon as possible, and definitely are nowhere near fully assigned. So we'd love more help in the open source community. So when you find something you like, discuss it with us on that issue. We'll assign it to you, and then you're free to start opening up a pull request to address it. And so thank you, everybody. You can, if you're watching on your computer, take a screenshot of this for all the links, so you have them. All this work, like we've been pitching, is happening in public. Check out that repository. Check out those docs. Check out those issues. Again, I'm from Pulse MCP. We write this in-depth weekly newsletter. I spend a huge portion of my time on it every week. So would love to spread the good word about what's going on in the MCP community every week.
Everyone should subscribe to that because it's a super great newsletter. It's how I get all of my MCP news.
Thanks, Toby. And similarly, Toby and his team's GitHub MCP server is awesome. I've been using it. It's probably the best well-designed MCP server out there. So you can learn a lot just by playing with it, trying out its different tool sets, and seeing what it can do for you. And how you might design a similar MCP server for whatever your favorite services are. We're happy to take questions if we have some time, but otherwise, thank you everybody for tuning in.
Thanks so much, Toby and Tadas. It's amazing to hear how you guys are coming together and the community is coming together to build the registry out in the open on GitHub. We do have a couple questions from the audience here, and so we'll go ahead and kick it off with this one. The question is, can we restrict some or set of MCP servers and organization at the organization level or for certain people?
Yeah. So as Tata said, this is the upstream server, right? So everyone's publishing this as kind of a canonical list of MCP servers. Downstream servers may and probably will filter some of this down, right? So maybe you're in an enterprise and you want to make sure that you're only allowing your employees to run MCP servers that have had your security scanning on them, or maybe you have a business relationship with some of these MCP server authors and you're comfortable with using them. So you would allow list just those. And then you wouldn't have the ones that were just like, hey, open source bro made this thing like yesterday, right? And you got it in your thing. So I think that you'll see a lot of this like selective filtering down on these downstream registries. But what you're going to get out of this is that when these server authors publish a new version, then the downstream registries will get it, right? And they won't have to go and scrape the entire web looking for this and have you as a server author email every single registry and say like, I've got a new version out or whatever. So I think, yes, that's a use case you're going to see a lot of.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. We have more questions around auth in particular. So first being, how does auth work for GitHub?
So the GitHub auth right now, we're using OAuth flow. There's going to be multiple mechanisms to verify the authorship and ownership of an MCP server. To get started, because most of these things are GitHub repos, the server itself, the registry itself, is a GitHub app, and that command line tool that I demoed will use the GitHub OAuth flow. So that's why when I was showing that server.json and I had the io.github.com.toby/server name, it'll say, okay, this is a GitHub account. I'm going to use the GitHub OAuth flow. It'll send you in. I'll have to do the pin and stuff to verify that I want to publish this. It will say like, okay, Toby is actually this person on GitHub and this repo actually belongs to him. We can publish it and verify the identity there. For people that aren't on GitHub, remote MCP URLs and all of these different things, we're thinking of two different mechanisms. One is DNS text records. So you can put in a key or something saying like, yes, this server is mine and I verify it because I have ownership over this DNS domain and I can add DNS text records. And another is probably doing a well-known file on a HTTP endpoint. So this is useful if you already have a remote server. It's already an HTTP app that's hosted. So you might be able to extend that with hosting the server information. But sometimes like for us at Microsoft, right, it's probably hard to get them to add a DNS text record to Microsoft.com. But if we have a web server up and running on a domain, then we can add this well-known. So we think between those three mechanisms, we're going to get a lot of coverage for identity verification and authorization across all the servers. But if you have other ideas, please do chime in because this is an area that we're actively working on right now.
Great. Awesome. Quick follow-up to that one was, does GitHub require a pat auth?
That's probably more of a question for the GitHub MCP server, but I'm happy to answer it as well. And yes, for the local MCP server, and no for the remote MCP server. You can do this exact same OAuth flow with the MCP server and do that. And if you're talking about from a registry perspective, it's just OAuth only.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining Toby and Tadas. It was really awesome to hear all about the registry and exciting to see what comes from the registry project in the future. So appreciate it, guys, and we'll catch you guys next time.